For full disclosure, I think I am totally a groupie. So I've been to all the festivals. Found you when you were teaching the Satire online satire course for the Second City. But because of when we met and now seeing everything that you're doing over the past few years, it feels like, at least from an outsider, that things have really exploded. Can you talk about, I guess, did it start with the publishing of your book, or where would you say the train of current things going on in your life started?
That's a good question. I think for me, I would say that in 2016, I moved to New York after living in Portland, Oregon for 4 years and Chicago previous to that. And kind of the move itself spurred me to want to take bigger chances in my career. It felt like, we had spent all this money to move to New York, and there was so much going on that I really wanted to take the opportunity to like create something of my own. So with three other women, Carrie Whitmer, Fiona Taylor, and Brooke Preston, we started a website called the Belladonna, which is comedy and satire written by women of all definitions. And that kind of got us like on the map in terms of like having our own thing and like becoming kind of figureheads in the community. And then we actually wrote New Erotica for Feminists, the piece, together. And we put that on McSweeney's with the idea that maybe if that piece did well, it would drive traffic to the Belladonna. And the piece, in fact, did so well that it went viral, and we got book deals in the UK and the US. We wrote the book in 3 months. It came out in November 2018. And that, I do think, is like kind of what kicked my career into a new level. But I would say it started back with like the move, the wanting to start something else with these other women. And then the book came from there. But that definitely seemed to be like, once you publish a book, I didn't know this because I mostly read on the internet, your prestige kind of goes up in the writing community, and people, it just has a much longer shelf life, no pun intended.
Well, it probably helped. I saw that Vulture, you were number 4 on the top humor books for the year it came out. And they said that the Belladonna comedy was like The Onion for women. So, I mean, that parallel was phenomenal.
That was major. And yeah, just the idea that every day more people follow the site and more people are reading it. And so it's just kind of interesting to be someone who now like is known in the humor community as like not only a teacher, but like an editor and a writer in my own right. So that has been from 2016 to now. I feel like I took a big step forward in my career.
Well, talk a minute, because when you say that idea of really putting yourself out there, I think sometimes people, that inner voice says, I can't do it, I'm not good enough. What did that feel like for you to say, I'm going to get rid of that and I'm just going to go for it?
It was honestly probably one of the hardest decisions I've made in my life. I think because I was living in Portland, Oregon with my husband. He had a great job. I was objectively doing well. I was a college professor, which is a career I always thought I wanted. But after the first 3 years, I just started to feel like this is not the shape of my life. And that's such a hard feeling to grapple with, especially when you have a partner who is like, I kind of feel like this could be my life. So it took us about a year of like really kind of analyzing what we wanted our lives to look like, what I felt was missing. To me, I felt more like I was on a parallel path. I was helping people be creative, but I myself didn't really have the time or the space or the community to be creative. And it was a really tough time. Like we had a lot of arguments, a lot of just really the kind of talks that are easier to not have. And ultimately what ended up happening is that my husband got a job in New York. And then ironically, because I was teaching at a college, I had to stay 6 months in Portland by myself. So he ended up moving before me and I stayed there by myself. But that time ended up being useful just in terms of like wrapping things up and moving. But it's really hard. And I was already in my 30s to like take a gamble and be like, I think I could do more if I just was in the right place. And I think especially for women, that can be really hard to say that to a partner and say like, I have to bet on myself at this point in time. And I know it's going to cost a lot of money and I know it's going to cost a lot of time. And there were other things like in Portland, we could have bought a house. We cannot buy a house in New York. Like, so it really was like a life choice that we had to make together. But it's worked out really well for both of us. He's really happy. I'm really happy. But I will say the year before we made that choice was very tumultuous.
Mm. And it sounds like you were saying just being in your 30s. So I think I mentioned a lot of my clients are non-digital natives. So they are possibly even like 20 years older than that, making big decisions and trying new things. having been at the comedy festival, a lot of those people are in their 20s.
Yeah.
So did age, even though it's relatively young, did age play a factor in how you were looking at things at all?
It did. There definitely was societal pressure to be like, well, you've lived your 20s, you've made your choices. Now it's time to kind of like be steady and settle down. And it's hard to fight against that. I don't even think we realize a lot of the time how internalized these narratives are until you're like, well, it just doesn't feel right. Like, yes, I'm a college professor and that's like a very stable thing. And I live in a city that most people would think was cool. But I really had to push against the idea that like this for some reason was not feeling right, like in my body. Like I couldn't sleep. I felt sick a lot. Like it became really clear to me in my early 30s, and now I'm 35, that like your body can tell you what's going on even when your mind is still confused. So I had that very clear experience of feeling just like physically ill at the thought of living there forever.
And you just said two things that are amazing. One, which is you lived your 20s. What is it? You lived your 20s, you made your decisions, now you have to live with it. That is huge for people taking on new things.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's really big is how attuned you were to listening to your body because of that connection between the physical and your physical and your mental presence, you know, and it sounded like you just knew it wasn't right. That's amazing.
Yeah, I used to be a swimmer. I was a long distance swimmer all through college and everything, all through high school. So I think I have like a kind of well attuned mind body connection. Like you can tell when you're hurt. Like we kind of get used to like knowing when something was a physical barrier as opposed to a mental barrier. And so it was interesting to have it be the other way. Like in swimming, very often your mind is telling you your body cannot when your body can. But here it was like my body was telling me what my mind didn't yet know, which is like you cannot live here. You know, you're from the East Coast. My whole family was on the East Coast. The vibe of the East Coast is just more for me. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm very grateful that my body was like, basically like, you're not going to sleep anymore. You're going to be physically ill a lot.
I'm not letting you get away with this. That's
not
great.
happy.
So tell me about, so your three partners that you work with, did you already know them? And what is it like to work? It seems like it'd be so much fun to actually have a group of sisters almost, you know, to work with as opposed to trying to do things on your own. But how did you make that happen?
Well, first off, it's interesting you said the thing about sisters, because at one point we realized all four of us only have sisters. None of us have any brothers. So between us, I think there's 9 sisters. So I think we're all kind of attuned to that way of working with other women. But I knew one of the women, Brooke Preston, she had been my student in Portland, Oregon in a sketch class, and she ended up missing the final class because she went into labor with her first child. And so I had known Brooke. She had since moved back to Ohio. She took my online classes, and I was like, oh, this is a woman who, she's a great writer. She's very creative, but she's like outside of New York or LA, and like something online would be good for her. But Carrie Whitmer just posted in an online group of female comedy writers, I want to start a website, who's in, to probably over 1,000 people. And myself and Fiona Taylor were the only ones who responded. So I think that's something that's so key, is like the act of showing up. I'm also in a writers group where we had like a big open call at the beginning, where like everyone show up if you're interested, and like 9 people showed up out of like the 40 who said they would come that day. And we've now been together over 2 years. There's so much power in like showing up when you say you're going to show up, or saying like, yes, I'll do that with you. And I actually didn't meet Carrie and Fiona in person for like months after we started. And the 4 of us didn't get together in one place until after we'd signed the book contract, a year and a half in. So it was purely an online chemistry thing that was just started by people being like, I want to do a thing, let's do it.
That's fabulous. And what is the balance? So you are doing a lot of online stuff. Actually, that begs almost 2 questions. That idea of how we build online relationships versus in person. Did you see any difference? Sometimes people get along really well online. They show up in person. They're like, oh, never mind. Like, what was it like when you guys were finally together?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think because we had chatted so much about like the internal workings of the site, like we've been in a group chat for over 3 years. So we had that element of like speaking to each other. But yeah, when we got together to write the book, because we had already written together and edited stuff together and kind of had to align our tastes on numerous levels, it was not, I thought it might be more stressful than it was. But we kind of had like a sense of like what the book should be, and any person could take anything out if they weren't comfortable with their name being on it. But yeah, like we actually still don't see each other in person very much, even though 3 of us live in the New York area, just because of where we live and timing and stuff. We tend to talk more often online. So still to this day, I think the foundation is like online written communication.
Okay. And although now you've created, this really feels like it filled a void, the Satire and Humor Festival. So
Hmm.
first one was in March of 2019, in March of 2019, just this
Yeah.
past year.
Yep.
And then in Chicago, I know I came because I had taken your online, the satire class at the Second City. So when I heard about it, and it was really well priced for people who are potentially struggling writers, but you got great speakers, and it seemed to fill a void in terms of convening community.
Yeah.
So talk about that. You know, it's like that idea of why hasn't somebody, what was the void that you felt that made you want to create that with the co-founders?
Yeah, so my career has kind of been like a series of steps up a ladder. And like I feel like one of my strengths, even though I don't really have any business training, is to see like what's missing kind of in the marketplace and like what there's a need for. So I started writing the online classes for Second City because I lived in Portland and I felt like there was no one living near me who did the kind of stuff I liked. So I was like, all right, well, let's create a community of people who want to do this no matter where they live. And so that went really well. And then we started the website, because a lot of people were complaining that like there weren't enough outlets to publish their work, especially as women. And then through the website, I was like, well, there's all these other websites, and why isn't there like an umbrella over the whole community to like bring us all together? And so I met James Folta, who's one of the editors of Point and Case, and he's run a show in New York for 6 years called An Evening of Humorous Readings, which is great. And then I had known Tulio Espinoza from taking an improv class, and he's a very close friend of mine. And with those two guys, it's like immediately I was like, oh, they're producers. Like they can produce events. They know what to do. Tulio had helped produce UCB's DCM festival. So like the three of us together had like an immediate connection.
What is that? The Uptown Brigade Comedy Club or?
Uptown Citizens Brigade, Upright
That's
Citizens Brigade. It's so it's like a New York based kind of alternative style improv and comedy. But that's like the big scene here in New York. So he was involved with them. James had done independent comedy, and they're both excellent writers. And we just had this chemistry that was different than like the website, which is editing and writing. And this is like boots on the ground, like getting spaces, ticketing, booking people. And like as soon as we like floated the idea to people, they got like so excited that we were like, oh, there's people have been wanting this. Like we're all friends from the internet, but we never have a reason to get together. And so like the first festival in New York in March, we thought like 40 people would come, and hundreds of people came to the events and the workshops. Same in Chicago, we had only 5 weeks to promote it, and hundreds of people came to that too. So I think it was clear that like people wanted an excuse to like travel and meet each other. And they ended up, a lot of people collaborated and got into the New Yorker and McSweeney's together. So it became a way not just to like hang out in person, but also to kind of like level up each other's careers as well.
Mhm. Well, I found it to be such a nurturing and supportive group too. Like it's so funny because even if you haven't been published, if you said, "Oh, I'm trying to write funnier," people are like, "That's great." I mean, it was so inclusive and wonderful, no matter what level of writing you had done. And then you would find out. I know I would find out afterwards. I'd been talking to someone, and then I would look them up, and they'd been published everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
so people were very unassuming, and always it felt like you're always like, "Ugh, what's that next piece I'm going to publish?" No matter what had
Yeah.
happened in the past. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the different parts of the community scene, comedy scene, have different vibes to them. So, like, improv is obviously very collaborative, but it's performance. Stand up is very singular; you're doing it on your own. And like novel writing is also very like done on your own sense of taste. But like this kind of writing, people were drawn to it. Like, first off, very smart people most of the time. Like, they had something to say. That's one of the reasons I like to teach the classes online. Is like I don't think you need a background in comedy. I think you just need to be kind of a curious person, and that's the best thing you can have to write humor and satire, to notice things and want to comment on them. So we started like just seeing how nice people were, and we realized that like if we got together in a group, like we also had a code of conduct that was just like you have to be open to speaking to other people. The theme of the festival is accessibility. So the idea that like not only like physical accessibility, accessibility of price, but accessibility of information to people. So I think one thing I always kind of disliked about writing in general is that it feels like unless you like went to Harvard and wrote for the Lampoon, like you don't understand that like yes, you can submit to the New Yorker. It's completely open. The editor Emma Allen came to the festival and like told people how to submit. So I really don't like the idea that like there's barriers to getting these bylines that are just information based. So one of the goals of the festival is to like break down this idea that like if you didn't go to a certain school or have these contacts, you can't do this kind of writing, because you definitely can. To me, like work for my own sake can start to feel somewhat hollow. Like if I'm only writing to advance my own career and get more bylines, if I'm only teaching to gain status and respect, like it really feels important to me that like I'm helping other people kind of recognize their own opportunities as well. And I think that that now comes in cycles for me. Like I'll put a lot of myself out there, you know, with the festival and with the website and with teaching. And then I kind of need like a month to myself, like to write and like read books and kind of like connect back with myself. I'm an introvert, so it's actually kind of hard for me to put this energy out there. But when I do it, I feel amazing. But then when I get back to my room or hotel room, or I get back to my house, I feel depleted on like a very deep level. So as I've gotten older, I think I've needed to like, I used to just go, go, go. And now I have to realize like in order to give, you have to like give to yourself too. But yeah, for me, the idea that like I would only ever write alone and never collaborate, never help others, never teach, just feels, it doesn't feel like how I want to balance out my life, like at the end.
Mm-hmm. And is there any advice for anyone, whether it's in comedy and satire, but someone really just willing to put themselves out there or take a risk for something they've always wanted to pursue? Do you have any advice for people?
I think sometimes in America, there's this cult of individualism, or this streak that the best stuff worth doing is you should do it on your own and get all the glory yourself. Otherwise, it's like not valid. But I will say that like the best things in my life, personally and professionally, have almost all come through collaboration. So whether that's teaching, whether it's working with these other women on the website and the book, doing the festival, you don't have to do everything alone. And I think that's what makes things daunting to a lot of people, especially if you're older, you're entering a new field, or you're trying to change your life completely. Like it takes so much energy to do it all yourself. Whereas like if you find someone to collaborate with, or a partner who's like, I'll handle this piece, you do that, all of a sudden like it got 50% easier, like in one fell swoop. So I think it's really important for people to think about like how they can collaborate and which projects might be best suited to not doing alone, even though that's kind of what the culture says is the most glorious thing we can do.